Thank you all for coming. So our group was with the Clean Air Task Force, where we studied community benefits agreements for renewable energy projects. This was done by myself, Sam Levine, Ali Pekega, Wei Shen right here, and Bu Yang, and special thanks to our instructor, Professor Ben Orloff. So for a quick overview of our agenda, so we're going to begin talking about the background, talking about the Clean Air Task Force, their mission and goals, the broader problem that we're facing with the renewable energy transition. We're going to talk about our process, how we gathered our findings, and we're going to finish up talking about our findings, best practices, recommendations, and a case study. So a little bit about the Clean Air Task Force. So broadly, the Clean Air Task Force is invested in helping the United States reach its climate goals. So this includes both decarbonization while also making sure that there is affordable and reliable energy access for communities across the country. So it's one of these dual challenges of both reducing energy production while also producing a lot more energy clean. So for the team that we worked with the climate equity team. So this is a picture of us in Newark, New Jersey. So the climate equity team is focused on how the energy transition can have a positive impact for marginalized communities. So in Newark, New Jersey, there are 4 natural gas plants in a very small location. And so we talked to community members about how all this fossil fuel development has had negative impacts on the public health in the community, as well as the social and economic opportunities in the community. And then we also discussed how clean energy infrastructure and renewable energy production could have potentially positive impacts on the community in terms of economic opportunities, but also health. So for a bit more context about the energy transition, one of the broader problems about this project, so the federal government, so this on the right is the signing of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was almost exactly 1 year ago. And so that, along with the bipartisan infrastructure law, has unleashed hundreds of billions of dollars for the energy transition. That said, communities across the country are quite reluctant, as you can see on the right, are very reluctant to have renewable energy projects developed in their backyard. So in order to address these challenges, so a critical component of this is that these renewable energy projects have to have community benefits agreements. So that way those communities that have those renewable projects in their backyard are actually benefiting from these renewable energy projects.
Okay, so I'll start to introduce about the background of community benefit agreements. Community benefit agreements are legal agreements between community advocacy groups and developers, guarantees social and economic benefits to the nearby communities of the development project. The CBAs are traditionally used for real estate development, but is now more widely applied in all realms, including energy sectors and transportation infrastructure projects. CBAs are important because of the urgency of energy transition to mitigate climate change. It achieves so by mitigating local opposition to the development project. Also, it invests in lower and middle income communities, which provides benefits to environmental justice and marginalized communities. The CBAs aim to reach a win-win-win situation for both communities, developers, and local governments, and by providing benefits and funds. However, the current problem is that there are a lack of information surrounding CBAs and their guidelines and requirements for energy developers. Energy developers have been given funding opportunities through the Partisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Law, which is abrasive in BIL and IRA. However, they must use community benefit plans or agreements in their applications, which are still very new in the energy space. Moreover, through our research, in some cases, federal guidelines of CBAs can be hard to understand for developers and communities, not only because of the official languages used in the documents, but also because of the lack of information from the certain departments, which I will introduce in the spreadsheet slide. In this slide, we will introduce the win-win-win situation we mentioned before. So the benefits for the community is it will provide local and targeted hiring commitments. CBAs will provide living wage and benefits. It will also create educational partnership between developers and community schools and support for local small businesses. For the developers, the community coalition agrees to support the project with public testimony and written statements. Community supports reduce risk of developers by mitigate the opposition behind the project. Developers more reliably get needed state or local subsidies for the approval. And last, for the government, CBAs will push the success development of clean energy project, hence boost economic growth, use the energy profit to generate revenue, and also lower the energy cost in the broad region. These benefits are intertwining. The benefit for local government is also for the local communities. For the methodology we use, we basically focusing on researching partisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act and the impacted federal programs. We review literatures from varying contexts, list on the slide, and also we collect information from Ironbound Trip about marginalized perspectives. We also utilize the insights from the members of CATF and their individual related experiences with this research. One of our deliveries is the federal guidelines spreadsheet. We analyzed 27 existing guidelines and requirements across 9 agencies, 3 departments, Department of Transportation, EPA, and Department of Energy have a total of 4 detailed guidelines resources explaining history and definition of CBAs. All of these guidelines explain the importance of CBAs, the importance of stakeholders' enrollment in the processes, and how to implement CBAs. They also provide case examples, but only Department of Transportation and EPA mentioned about enforcement and monitoring of CBA and the opportunities and limitations of CBAs. These 3 departments have total 4 detailed guidelines resources, and these detailed resources have some differences. The 3 departments for CBA's definition varies. Also, the way the emphasis on the importance of CBAs is slightly different. EPA aims on addressing community benefits, while Department of Energy mentions more about how it ensures developers get funds while addressing community benefits. They have diverse suggestions for successful CBAs. EPA says that enrollment current existing community organizations will be helpful, while DOE emphasizes that there needs to be an early engagement with the communities. DOT has a more comprehensive suggestions on implementing CBA, which is similar in emphasizing enforcement and accountability that all of these documents do mention. Besides these 3 departments, other departments and agencies only mention they want CBAs for funding purposes or briefly recommend CBAs. Some of them mentioned that CBAs is required and recommended for meeting funding evaluation criteria. They also mentioned some public meeting notes or community members and other stakeholders' feedback where community members talk about CBAs. They recommended CBAs in the form of a news and clarifying difference between CBAs and other terms.
So one of the main examples of the federal offices involved with financing the energy transition is the Loans Program Office. So the LPO is part of the Department of Energy. And so this is from July of 2023. And as you can tell, like they're involved with investing hundreds of billions of dollars across energy sectors to really scale up this energy transition. So one thing you might notice is over there you see advanced vehicles and components. One of the past recipients from the LPO was Tesla, but an even bigger recipient now is renewable energy. So I think this just demonstrates that the federal government really is invested in scaling up clean energy production to be commercially competitive. But another critical aspect of the LPO is that they require community benefits plans, and a central component of community benefits plans is having a community benefits agreement. So in terms of the best practices for community benefits agreements, there are 4 critical components. First, negotiation and design, then implementation, enforcement, and then monitoring and evaluation. So when developers come to communities, it's really important that they bring everyone in the community to the table, and that's obviously easier said than done. But 2 of the most important things that developers should consider is number 1, considering local historic local history and power dynamics in figuring out how to bring some of the most underrepresented voices to the table. So that way they can ensure that they are, boosting, these environmental justice communities and supporting them. And then secondarily, they also need to work with some of the communities that are going to be most impacted, particularly those who are going to be most negatively impacted by the renewable energy development, and coming together and really working on solutions in which they could, mitigate the challenges while also presenting solutions that work for community members. The developers, need to work on implementing solutions that they'll actually be able to follow through upon. And then when it comes to enforcement, this may require working with the local government. That's going to depend on the context and the local history and power dynamics within the community. Sometimes it may be useful to work with the government and fold it into a development agreement, which is a little complicated to explain. Or this enforcement might exist outside of the local government. And then also monitoring and evaluation, making sure that this project, the developers follow through 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. So for one of the case studies that we researched, we have about 20, but we wanted to focus on this one for the presentation. So the Jacumba Valley Ranch Energy Park, so there's the German solar developer called BayWa, and so they went to this community called Jacumba Hot Springs. It's in Southern California. And so they signed a community benefits agreement for this utility solar farm. And as part of this $4 million community benefits agreements, they have $1 million for a rooftop solar installation, another $250,000 to go to a local park, another large sum of money. It went to a program where it's meal deliveries for seniors. So just to make sure that, they could be well nourished. And then also more money to a local museum for a climate exhibit. That said, they're still, and so also the remaining $2.5 million is going to be distributed. It hasn't been distributed yet, but it's going to be distributed with community feedback. That said, there still are persistent frustrations and continued opposition against this utility solar farm. So one of the biggest frustrations is that the energy produced by this solar farm isn't going to the community, it's going to San Diego. BayWa has a power purchasing agreement with San Diego. But I think it makes sense that if there's a bunch of energy development happening in your backyard, you would want that to lower your energy costs. And when it doesn't, that's going to generate some frustration. Another source of concern was threats to public health. So BayWa initially, they only had a buffer zone of, I believe it was 30 feet. And so the community was very 30 feet from a local residential development, so, right next to people's homes. And so one of the concerns was that this is going to produce a bunch of dust. As you're constructing all these solar panels, it's going to put a bunch of dust in the air, and that dust is going to end up in people's respiratory systems, and it's going to contribute to a illness called desert lung. And there are also additional concerns that would also exacerbate the heat island effect. So BayWa kind of mitigated these concerns by increasing that buffer zone from 30 feet to 300 feet, which was better, but the local opposition and those concerns still exist. And then the last concern, the last major concern is the threats to the local tourism industry. Where tourists come to this area for the scenery, to sightsee, and there are concerns that building up a bunch of solar panels will undermine that broader landscape and undermine and really hurt that local tourism industry. So I think this case just goes to show that both a lot of the challenges as well as the solutions towards this renewable energy development is fiercely local, where these problems you're not going to have somewhere in New England, for example. So it's really critically important, I believe, that for renewable energy developers to really work with community members, really try to understand their concerns and figure out how can they really have benefits for the community. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a really great lesson. Presentation. I'm a teacher, so I'm just anyways. So in terms of the benefits though, looking at those numbers, I'm thinking to myself, it's okay, we're going to give you 1 million, we're going to give you $250,000, et cetera, et cetera. But is it a one-time benefit or is it reoccurring? Because ultimately these solar panels would be established in this community and providing power to San Diego for a long period of time and possibly even getting updates and renewals. So is there like a long-term benefit or a renewal benefit for this community? And could that be something that should also be included in CPAs?
I think that's a great question, and I think that kind of demonstrates why we need to learn from these examples. Some of the community members referred to this utility solar farm as putting lipstick on a pig, where it's like, okay, well, give us a little bit of money now, but what happens 10 years from now when our tourism industry is hurt, when when it's hotter outside, and so I think that's exactly the point, which is we do need to look at this long-term enforcement. In terms of this particular community, this has just happened like very recently, a couple months ago, so I don't know what it's going to look like long-term, but that's absolutely correct that we do need to figure out how to have these long-term, real tangible impacts or tangible benefits for the community.
I'll just say, building on that, the flip side is that some of the initial investments can pay off over a long time. And then there's also just, you've been talking about the history, the challenges of implementation and enforcement. If they agree to do something right away, you can catch the developers if they don't. And if they promise to do something over 10 years, you're stuck. So, I think you're really pointing to some of the power dynamics that are actually just shifting as we watch. And these are complicated questions.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing with sometimes it's beneficial to incorporate the local government as an enforcer of these agreements, and that would make it as part of a broader development agreement. But there are also concerns when it comes to these power dynamics. The local government may not have a great relationship with certain community groups, and some community groups may want to keep the local government out of it. So in terms of the long-term enforceability, that is a very complex problem.
You spoke about how you went to visit some communities in Newark. Could you speak a little bit more about that experience and how that was kind of facilitated by the Clean Air Task Force and things?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, actually. So this was in the Ironbound community. So the climate equity team is is a group within the broader Clean Air Task Force. And so they're focused on really working with what is called sacrifice zones, and working with these communities and understanding their needs and understanding broadly how the energy transition can help address the needs of these communities. So we went to Newark, and so in this Ironbound neighborhood, so they have an airport, which many of us have been through. They have a ton of traffic. They have a port. They have a wastewater treatment plant. They have a trash incinerator, and they have 4 natural gas plants. And that's abusive. That's like a sacrifice zone, and it's really pretty unconscionable. When we were listening to these community members, and you might want to add something, but some of the community members in these focus groups would talk about how family member after family member after family member has died of cancer because different companies are just spilling chemicals into the ground. They can't even grow food out of the ground. They have to grow food on like elevated surfaces. Do you want to add anything about that experience?
Yeah, we've actually visited a farm where they basically buy all this soil far away, order it far away from the location because all the land there is contaminated with lead, which is left from the old industry of iron because iron bond is like metal industry. So the whole land is very much contaminated and yes, so a lot of them are facing this situation where the place is contaminating more and more because of a lot of instructions. But the land there, the price for houses there is getting higher and higher through the time. So one of the major thing of community benefit agreements that is mentioned in a lot of projects is affordable housing, so that we don't push them away from their land. We try to help them hold the land livable and also cleaner.
Yeah, just to build off of that, one of the problems is, you have all these terrible health conditions, but as soon as these health conditions are improved, then the gentrification comes in, the prices go up, and the residents, as soon as they're able to make their communities nicer, then they get priced out. So it's like, how can we have these community benefits agreements that both improve quality of life while also not pricing out the local residents?